Hey, what is up? This is Jake. This week we have another best of version of Whitetail Cribs. This includes some of the craziest stories we found throughout the year. One includes John Eberhart. Another one is a mountain lion story. Another one is a Montana elk hunt that had a crazy turn for the worst. And also a battle to the death in Iowa. We hope you guys enjoyed them. If you want to check out the full episodes of those will be in the description below. We hope you have a good 2021 start. Started mine with a sty, so that's why it's a little puffy right there. But we hope you guys enjoy this video. Let's go ahead and get right into it.
And in 2011, I drew a coveted Iowa tag. This buck right here, we call Grandpa Buck because he's so gray. November 11, 2011, we slept in that morning due to sleet, wind, rain, all the things that'll keep a hunter in bed. And we went out to breakfast instead. So I got on stand around 11:30. I was only on stand for about 15-20 minutes, and he came in and bedded down in a dry creek bed. I was in my saddle, and I could swing around and I could get a shot at the deer, but the wind was whipping so hard, it was blowing this big cedar bough in front of his vitals. So I decided that I was only 20 yards from him. I was gonna climb down and I was gonna put a stalk in on that buck. And it took me about 20 minutes to climb down 20 feet. I get to the base of the tree. I had got tangled up in some thorns, and like it just seemed like nothing was going right, but I just kept reminding myself, you know, at this point I had already gotten farther than I thought I could get. And I crouched down in the weeds, and the weeds were about 5 feet tall, and the thorns and the briars, and every time the wind blew I just started poking through. I got within 10 yards of the deer. I saw that he finally saw me. And I knew at the next wind gust I had to draw my bow. So wind gusted, and we're talking 35-mile-an-hour winds. It was very significant. And when that wind blew hard, I drew my bow. He was looking right at me, and I shot him in the shoulder. He jumped up, but he immediately went down. I thought I got him. He stood up again. And when he stood up again, he started heading towards a fence line where I did not have permission, and I was strictly told never to trespass on it. And in my caveman brain, I knew that if I was going to have that deer, I had to do something. So I reached for another arrow, and my quiver was in the tree. I reached for my knife was in my backpack in the tree. I didn't have anything. And the next thing I saw were my hands grabbing his antlers as he tried to make it up the bank and over that fence. I pulled him back hard onto the ground. And as I stood over him and I tried to push down on him, he had a ton of life left in him, like way more than you could think. And finally, against my will, he stood up completely, and I knew I was in trouble. He would jag his head backwards and try to stab me with his rack, and I would take a step back, and every time I took a step back, he tried to kick me with his back legs. So we're doing this pirouette dance around in a circle like this. Didn't even have to put a penny in. And I could no longer hold him. My arms were starting to give out. At one point, I jammed my palm in and my elbow inside his rack so I could get a hand free. But every time I did that, he'd try to stab me. He got his antlers up in my belly, up under my ribs a few times. And as I began to get more and more fatigued, I honestly started to make peace with life, and you know, well, this is the way I'm gonna go, I guess. And at about that moment, and we were going around our 17th revolution around the creek bed, I noticed a small puddle under a root system, and it looked like it was deep enough to dip his nose in. And so I started angling towards that. I eventually wrapped my leg around his front legs, and I threw everything I had into it. We both tumbled over, and I landed his nose in the water. And he finally took a breath of the water. And at that moment, I felt his body relax a little bit. And I thought it was finally going to be over. And he rallied hard and started to push back up on me. And I thought, oh no, I don't have anything left in me to hold this deer down. And I noticed the knock of the arrow up here. Something was poking me here, and I grabbed it by my palm and I pushed and pushed and pushed until I felt it give. And when it gave, he relaxed. I saw the crimson hit the water, And I literally laid on him like a pillow, breathing heavy as my heart was pounding and kind of in disbelief that it was finally over. But yeah, it was a fight for life in both directions, and I almost lost.
In the middle, that's a 180 incher, and that one I shot in Iowa. And on that one was an interesting story. I actually said this on a podcast. I can't remember whose podcast it was, but that buck, I had been hunting. I was on an all-day sit. I was down in this big hole down by a river, big flat down in a river flat. And it was going to be an all-day sit, and I was sitting in the morning with a decoy out. And I wasn't really seeing much. I saw a decent buck at a distance, but other than that, I wasn't seeing much else. But I was seeing a lot of deer about 200 to 250 yards away in a different direction. So at about 10 o'clock, I decided to get down and make a move. So I took my steps out as I was going down the tree. I packed up the decoy and left it there for my exit when I left because I wasn't going to take the decoy with me. And I just slowly freelanced back closer to where I'd seen all that deer traffic earlier in the morning. And I found a scrape area from hell. I mean, there was 4 big scrapes. One scrape had been urinated in not too awful long ago. It still had a wet spot in it. And it had 2 big clumps of deer droppings, and they were clumped together, which is typically a buck, and also the droppings in the clumps were really, really big. So I prepped a tree, got up in the tree. I was probably in the tree at around 2 o'clock, somewhere in there, and I started seeing deer right away. And then this buck here, that big 12-point came in, and he came in at what I thought was about 40 yards, and he came in so fast I didn't have an opportunity to actually range find him. And he wasn't coming into the scrapes. He was actually circling downwind of the scrapes. So I drew my bow back. I thought he was about 40 yards away, so I put my 35-yard pin on him, and I don't shoot a real flat shooting bow. It's about 240 feet per second. So I put my 35-yard pin and held it a little bit high, and when I let the arrow go, I hit exactly where I aimed. I shot right between the top of the lungs and the bottom of the spine. So I knew I didn't kill the deer. I felt like cutting my lead strap and just committing suicide and falling out of the tree. But I'm like, you know what? I saw a decent buck in the morning, maybe he'll come by, you know, because this is obviously the main primary scrape in this area. Well, when I shot this buck, the arrow passed through, obviously, and he ran about 80 yards and went into some really heavy junk. I'd say half an hour, 40 minutes before dark, I decided to do a rattle sequence. And so I took my bag out and did a sequence, and from right where that big buck went in the brush, another deer came out, a big buck came out. And it never crossed my mind that it could possibly be the same deer. But as it got closer, because he was about 80 yards when he came out of there, as he got closer, I was like, man, that frame looks exactly like the one I shot a couple hours ago. And when he got about 30 yards away, and he's making a beeline right for the scrapes, which are 12 yards away. When he got about 30 yards, I could see the hole in him. So it was the same exact buck I had shot a couple hours earlier. And then he got to the scrape. He started working the scrape at 12 yards, and I drew back and I shot him at 12 yards, and he ran about 40 yards and fell over within sight. And that was the end of that story. So it was a freelance hunt, but it's the only time in my life I've ever had 2 shots at one deer.
This turkey here was one I competed with in Nashville last year. It is from Nevada, and there's another a cool story behind this one. So I had to fly him home in my suitcase as well. Nevada, if you've ever looked into turkey hunting, Nevada, there's only 2 counties with turkeys in Nevada. And if you apply on public land in Nevada, they give 1 non-resident tag a year to turkey hunt. I did not draw that tag. You can find a landowner and they can agree to sell you their turkey tag through the DNR. It's a little bit of a process, but you can still do it. But anyway, I managed to get a hold of a landowner tag. But when I got to Nevada, this landowner had also gave 3 other people permission to hunt his land. And there was 1 flock of turkeys on this whole thing. And we were there really early. So it was about a flock of about 130 turkeys, I'd say. And there was probably 20 longbeards, or probably more than that, to be honest with you. But all of us are just kind of watching this flock, and nobody knows anybody, so everybody's trying to figure out how we're going to do that. Well, I watched those turkeys all evening, and Nevada doesn't have a whole lot of trees. So there was 3 trees for 130 turkeys to roost in, and they were big trees. But anyway, when it got dark, all those turkeys pitched up into those trees. And I'm trying to think how I'm going to beat these other guys to these birds in the morning. Well, as I'm glassing from this hillside watching these birds fly up, I see this big root ball that is directly beneath those turkeys. And to crawl under a flock of turkeys like that, you really have to have it together. So I started my crawl at about 2 a.m. the next morning because it was supposed to break daylight at like 4:30 or 5. But I crawled into that root ball while they were sleeping, and I laid there for 2 hours just because I knew that they would probably hit the ground in gun range. But listening to 30 or however many gobblers it was behind me that morning wake up, it was one of the most surreal things. The drumming and the gobbling and just the turkey talk that I heard that morning, I'll never forget. And once they started hitting the ground, I had to shoot one very, very quickly, because if I didn't, I was probably going to kill about 6 or 7 of them with one shot. So as soon as the longbeard hit the ground, I made sure that it was an adult, and I shot him, and I went out and grabbed him, and there was 2 people on each side of me, and I saw him get up and go, but I had to crawl in under him that morning.
First animal I want to tell you guys about is this elk up here. I killed this elk about 20 years ago in Montana. Quite an interesting story. I hadn't been elk hunting a whole lot when I was on this elk hunt. I believe I had elk hunted maybe twice before this, and I'd shot 1 cow. So, you know, I wasn't real experienced with elk, and especially big bulls. And we got into some really nice elk in this area in Montana. And the second morning, I managed to get an opportunity at this bull and put a really good shot on him. And it all sounds easy to that point, but what it took for us to get the meat out of there and what happened after that was quite a story. So the area we were in was relatively rough. We decided we were better off going back and getting our frame packs from camp and hiking back out to our vehicles and coming in from a different direction. So we did that, but what we didn't realize was how far we would have to go from that other direction. We thought it was about half as far as it was. We thought we had, you know, 1.5 miles or 2 miles to go, and it ended up being more like 4.5. So that took a lot more time, and really by the time we got back into the elk and got him quartered up, took pictures and whatnot, got him, you know, started loading packs up, most of the day had went by. It was starting to get late in the evening, and a friend of mine and I, John Schaefer from Schaefer Performance Archery, we were going back to get the last load of meat and all of our equipment, which had, you know, my lights and extra clothes and all this stuff. During the day, it was 60, 65 degrees, nice and warm. We were in t-shirts and, you know, cotton pants. Well, we didn't get back there in time, and it got dark on us. And not only did it get dark, but a storm blew over the mountain, kind of settled in with us. It cut all the twilight off. We were literally in a situation where we couldn't see a thing. So what we did was we started trying to ease our way out of there, and my friend John just kind of disappeared. And I knew that he'd fallen off of something. And as I started to yell and ask him if he was okay, the bank broke out from under me. And I started falling. And I had the time to think as I was falling that, oh my gosh, I'm falling a long ways. That entire phrase went through my mind as I was going, and hit the ground. And he ended up going back out there about a month later and found where we'd fell. He got our packs and some other stuff that we'd left, and he measured it with a rope and ended up being 32 feet. But anyways, at the end of the day, we got my elk out of there and got to the hospital, got patched up. Everybody lived through it. That bull's a 6x6. He ended up scoring 343.5 inches. So that's my best one this far, and I'm pretty happy with that.
I've been out west one time in my life hunting. I went on an elk hunting trip, and I bought a predator tag, and we were in Idaho, in Upper Peninsula, Idaho, which is really rough. And we slept in tents. We'd hear wolves all night, and they warned us about, you know, the mountain lion population, be careful. I saw a mule deer coming down a mountain, and it was all bloody, and it was delirious. And I didn't know whether it had a disease and it fell down the rocks or what was wrong, you know, with the mule deer. You know, it was a doe. And all of a sudden I looked up on this rock, and he was just perched there, just like a cat. And he jumped about 12 feet off this rock, and he went down and he swiped the legs out from under the doe, and he wouldn't kill it. He was just
toying with it like a mouse. And the deer, went down. It would try to get back up. It'd fall down, and it was like playing with it. It was eventually going to kill it. The guide said that they shoot, they eat a deer a week or an elk every 2 weeks is what they kill. All our guides quit but one, so I was kind of like by myself, and I shot him, and he jumped about 10 feet in the air, came down, and he went in this real thick pine thicket. I called the guide, and the guy goes, well, listen, I can't get down here. You got to go get him by yourself. So, I was younger, and I got my 7mm in one hand and a knife in another hand. I'm going through these pines. My heart's beating out of my chest, and there's just little specks of blood. I thought I wounded him. I said, this thing's going to kill me. I couldn't see 8 feet in front of me. And I actually went in there and I hit him right behind the shoulder, and it was laying there dead. At the end of it, I called him back. I said, I did get him. He goes, well, listen, you're going to have to skin it out yourself and get it out of there. And I've never done that. So he kind of told me on the walkie-talkie how to do it. I did it, got it back out. Halfway up the hill, I'm exhausted. I got this cat hanging over my shoulders, and I lay it on the ground. I take a break, and I look up, and there's a 6x6 looking at me about 400 yards away. Biggest elk, only big elk I saw the whole week. And, my gun's laying there, but I didn't have shooting sticks. I didn't get a shot. He smelled the blood, or he smelled me, and he took off. But it was neat still getting him and seeing an elk like that, shortly thereafter. Getting him through the airport, they told me to freeze him in my backpack and just, check him. So I froze him. He's in my backpack, and I go through the airport, and this lady looks at me and she goes, honey, what's in the bag? It went through the x-ray machine. And I said, a mountain lion. So a friend of hers was working as one of the check ladies, and she goes, x-ray check. And this lady comes out with really nice nails, and she comes up to me and she goes, well, what do we have here? And I said, she goes, and her friend was behind her going like this, and I just handed her the bag, and she unzipped it, and the face was looking up. She goes, oh, you'll be good. And she let me go through. There could have been anything in that bag. So kind of a funny story with the cat.